Hello, Eli here with Shred Magazine, introducing this installment of Three Ways. Three Ways is a series where we invite folks doing work in different fields, roughly representing science, politics, and culture, to answer one question together. In our first installment, Jessica Aszodi facilitates a conversation with Brianna Tong, Nijmie Dzurinko, and Tori Larsen, unpacking the question, what should be our most urgent priorities for change, and how can we move forward together? I'll introduce our guest today, then turn it over to Jessica and the rest of the crew. Nijmie Dzurinko is a working-class Black, Indigenous, and queer organizer and strategist of over 20 years from Pennsylvania. She's co-founder and co-coordinator on a volunteer basis of Put People First PA, a base-building human rights organization waging a campaign for healthcare as a human right. They are also volunteer co-chair of the Pennsylvania Poor People's Campaign and a member of the National Steering Committee. Nijmie serves on the executive board of the National Union of the Homeless and is also a member of the University of the Poor and the Popular Education Front. Brianna Tong is a singer, former organizer, formerly with the People's Lobby, craft doer, and past/present emo living in Chicago. She sings in Bussy Queen Power Trip, Cordoba, and Giraffe, and spent years organizing college students and young people. Tori Larson is a science educator, a researcher across many fields, an artist, and an organizer. Their work focuses on the ways in which science contributes to and is simultaneously a product of our society. They are presently working on projects that seek to bring an abolitionist and anti-imperialist lens to science and science institutions. They work with Free Radicals, the Science Workers Collective, and Chicago's #DefundCPD campaign. So all of those great organizations that we mentioned will be linked to in the description of this episode. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Jessica and the rest of the crew.
Welcome to Shred Magazine's One Idea, Three Ways. In this series, we invite experts from different fields, roughly representing science, politics, and culture, answer one question together. It isn't our goal to settle the issue, but to gather multiple perspectives to see if we can find new ways of approaching old problems, and perhaps just importantly, to get into the habit of holding space for one another, even when we're coming from very different places. So today's guests are Brianna Tong, Tori Larson, and Nijmie Dzurinko. If you want to check out more about them, we're going to provide links at the end. And I'm Jess Aszodi, and I'm one of the editors at Shred Magazine, and I'll be moderating the talk. So I think it's time we get started with our big topic question for today. What should be our most urgent priorities for change, and how can we move forward together? Who would like to be first cab off the rank? Nope.
I can
go. Great.
I think sorry. It's such a big question. So I think that's why it's hard to get an answer. And I think when I think about this type of thing, I always think about like what are like literal like systems that should change, but also like what ways do I guess the movement and just like people in general, like people's kind of views and imaginations, like what ways do those have to change? So we can have mass support for like the type of systems that we need to like fundamentally reshape or destroy. So I think that makes it so hard. And then when we're talking about like issues, there's like just hundreds of thousands of things that are terrible. Yeah, so I don't know.
What are the priorities? Like if we're thinking, I'm gonna like unpack the question a little bit. It's such a purposely asking these impossible questions in these kinds of discussions. But maybe we could look at, if we think about the idea of an urgent priority, I often think about this in relation to triage. Like we're in a time where that's really on our minds, a time of crisis. Like in a triage situation, what is the most urgent priority? What should be at the front of our planning and our minds?
Yeah, I think when you sent us this question, the urgent really stuck out to me,
Mm-hmm.
partly because, at least, in science, I think who decides what is urgent and how it's decided is one of the fundamental things we first have to consider if this is in fact the question we're asking. Just because, I don't know, anything from the funding structures in academia to just what questions people believe are most important, what arguments get believed most in terms of what is most urgent. There's a lot that needs to get worked on there. And I think something that, there's an instinct for a lot of people in science and technology fields to kind of be like, well, I have a solution. Technology is it. If we just make algorithms to tell us what is most urgent, or put together these new structures, then it'll solve this issue and these inequalities that exist. But the problem is, as you may know, none of those things get made from nothing. They don't get made from scratch, and they're very much so based and within the very systems that they're, potentially attempting to change too. So, yeah, for me, I'm starting from the word urgent before I even go on to priorities when I look at this.
I think that's a really amazing answer. If we could, I hate this idea, but I'm going to do it anyway. If we could bracket the question for a second of needing to form consensus and imagine something everyone can get behind. I'm really curious to hear, like, from a personal perspective, standing on the ground where you are right now, what feels most urgent to you from your experience that you're having at this time?
Yeah, I mean, I think I like the point about sort of disrupting the idea of urgency. I think that what's critical is actually reimagining the idea that there are these just sort of separate things, right? There's like millions of issues and millions of fights. And I think what's really critical or urgent, in a manner of speaking, is like helping particularly the working class understand that there's like the problem of the state and the problem of capital, right, that underlie like all of these issues, right? So like state violence is one arm of the state, right? And the healthcare crisis is another manifestation of that. And the economic crisis is a manifestation of that. And so it's actually like, to me, what's really urgent and critical is like understanding that these are different manifestations of the similar root, or the same root, and like raising the consciousness about that. Because otherwise we are in the situation where we feel like we just have to fight on all of these fronts. They're all different issues. And like, we may be fighting on different fronts, but if we don't understand that underlying fundamental root, then we can't actually formulate, a strategy to overturn it, not just kind of try to make things better in these individual ways.
Oh, totally. Do you have anything to say to that, Brianna or Tori?
Absolutely. I think my battle personally is getting scientists to realize that they can't opt out from seeing those unified roots and those causes beneath things, because I think often many people who operate within scientific realms, which includes universities, industry, and more, kind of hide behind this veil of neutrality or objectivity that prevents them from having to engage with the fact that everything they do and what they are able to do is very much tied to the same sort of realities that everyone is reckoning with. So definitely what's urgent to me is making it so that people don't feel they can opt away from that sort of line of questioning, that they must confront that as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I think too, like, I guess it can, like, what has been feeling urgent to me during, like, COVID especially is just, like, getting people their basic needs when, like, the government and the state are just, like, completely refusing to, like, meet basic needs, like, get people paying rent, like, people having a place to be, people having, like, food, like, groceries, and, it said, like, COVID, like, PPE and stuff. But then I think it is so important on top of that, like Nijmie was saying, like, to increase people's consciousness of, like, why do we have to be the ones providing our communities with this stuff when we clearly have enough food, like, have a healthcare system that could be giving everyone, like, the care they need, like, etc. Like, why did it go to our communities to provide these basic needs, and why are people's basic needs not getting met in the first place?
Yeah, that's such a good point. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No. Zoom problems. Nijmie.
No, I was just going to say that's such a good point. I think that's a great piece to kind of add on to all of the mutual aid, what people call mutual aid work taking place. And I think there's like another way to look at it, building on like the Black Panthers and the free breakfast programs and the free health clinics that they did, which they were, you know, talked about survival pending revolution. And there's a sort of a legacy that comes out of that actually talks about those things as projects of survival, which is a little different than mutual aid, right? Because mutual aid sort of stays in this space of like, we're going to do it because the state's not doing it. And projects of survival is, we're going to do it and we're going to call out the state for not doing it, right? Which is kind of what you're saying, Brianna. And I really think that's the consciousness raising piece of like, yeah, no, there's enough, you know, we don't have to divorce ourselves from society and go away and, you know, start over with stone tools. Like, there's enough. We should actually own the infrastructure. We should own the technology. We should own the science, you know, that created this vaccine, right? That's ours. It doesn't like belong to billionaires, you know? And so like raising that consciousness as we do that work to support our communities, which I think is happening so much, you know, out of necessity and is going to continue.
So it sounds like we formed a fairly quick consensus around the broad idea of raising a consciousness of the way that capitalism is kicking us all in the guts. But what if we take Tori's point about de-siloing and trying to get people on board who think that maybe it's not their problem and they can just deal with the problems within their own field. Maybe we could talk a little bit about that process. Like, how do we do the necessary healing or reconciliation or even just basic finding a way to talk to each other to do this raising of this consciousness that is so incredibly urgent?
I do think in some ways the pandemic has provided like an opportunity for everyone to see like how much, well, I think a lot more people than before maybe are realizing like just how deeply, especially the United States government, but like a lot of like governments just did not care about like poor working class people at all during this pandemic. So I think a lot more people are like realizing that, and I think that's just a point to go off of and like something that could be useful for organizing.
So anybody, I'm sure that you're all have some great examples of the way that you're responding to the situation in terms of, repeat my last question. I can try. My last question was that it seems that we all agree that raising a consciousness about the underlying causes of these many disparate, urgent to address needs are the structures that underlie the systems of capital, particularly in the US at the moment. And that Tori raised an interesting point about, for example, science being a place where people want to cut out all the variables. They would like to be able to make a problem simple so that they can just address one thing in front of them and can divorce themselves from needing to attack this big, messy, underpinning stuff, because it's hard to that's why we have these conversations become so awkward. To even find the next word in the sentence so that you can say something that still feels true is incredibly hard. And Brianna raised an interesting point about this being a point in history where people are, in general, feeling it more personally and more urgently than have been in most of our lifetime's memory. People, the big people. And I asked if there are any examples in terms of executing on this urgent priority, that is the structures that underlie making everything difficult. Maybe you want to talk about some examples of the way that you've been taking action on this particular urgent priority, because it seems so big, and sometimes I would think it's easier if we can break it down into thinking about, like, how would you and how do you work on steps to address a really big, complicated problem like that?
I mean, I think the key thing that I've definitely learned and been taught over a long period of time, that I'm only, still learning to really internalize, is like that it's really about building leaders, right? Who can actually really understand, both from our lived experience and from collective action or collective struggle, what is it that we're in? Like, what is the process that we're in? What is, the stage of history that we're in? What is this time that we're heading into, right? There's like a lot of instability that we're heading into. What does that suggest are the possibilities actually for change? And so I think building those leaders can come through many ways, right? Like, it can come through working on many issues, many campaigns. For us, like ours, we've chosen healthcare because that's an issue that is fundamentally uniting. We're not all impacted by it in the same way, but we all have a relationship to it. And so therefore it can kind of bring together folks who, are from urban and rural and suburban and small town areas, across geographies, across racial groups, across ages, all kinds of things. And so, it's really, I think, for us, the concept is like, how do we have the vehicles that can build those leaders? And those vehicles can be working on a number of things, but if they have an orientation around leadership development and around, real kind of study and engaging with these questions, it's almost like, you can be in any front of struggle, but if you have that in common, you can build leaders who understand the connections between those things. If your orientation is about how to unite the working class.
I couldn't agree more. Brianna, Tori, do you have any examples from your work sphere, your experiences that you've been having, Brianna? I believe you're a musician and a librarian, for example.
Yeah, I work in a library. I'm not a librarian yet. But no, I think, like, it's been, because I used to, I like did organizing as my like job for like 4 years, and was like a volunteer before that, and was doing like a little, I don't know, I guess I got back into stuff kind of last summer. But I think it's also been super interesting to both, I think like before the pandemic, also like, I think the library is such a site of like possible organizing, because there's people coming in for like all type of stuff. Like to use the computers, to like get free books obviously, and like movies and stuff, but also for like a lot of community programs, or to be like, yo, where's the nearest like shelter, or where's the nearest like food pantry. So I think there's just like a lot of organizing that like can and does happen in the library, which is really dope. And I think that's like such a space for like introducing people to new ideas, because that's like probably what they're there for anyway, and that's like the library's mission. So I think that's really dope. And then I think just also, yeah, like it was interesting to go from like a workspace where like, I guess one thing I deal with a lot, I guess, is like calling the cops. Like people, there's like certain policies about like call the cops on this, but a lot is up to like people's interpretation. So I'm like always trying to get my coworkers to like not call the cops on people. But it was like very interesting to go from like a workspace where like no one would have called the cops to like one where I'm like, can we think about other solutions? But I think there is so much of that to be done as like just a person with your coworkers, or just like the people in your life, to like move them slowly on like day-to-day kind of radicalization, I guess, or just like things that would make people's lives better. So I think that's like big, and something like we could all be doing. And yeah,
I feel like I'm hearing, you know, we get caught up in a buzzword like an urgent priority, like thinking, let's get this bill passed now. But maybe what's more urgent is finding these uniting points that people, like physical spaces like libraries, and basic needs like healthcare, that nobody can disagree are incredibly important spaces for potential and for change and for transformation of individuals as well as communities. Like that often falls by the wayside in the discussion of what's urgent, because it seems so basic, because it is really basic. Tori, do you have any examples that you would want to add? You're in the more traditional kind of academic sphere.
Yeah, absolutely. Bringing people in who don't necessarily believe there's anything to be brought into is quite an endeavor. And yeah, I mean, I'd echo what you said. I think that one of the most urgent things is showing people that there is a thing to be urgent about, which seems wild for people who are in organizing spaces, because even if you're not living and breathing your organizing, you have other things going on. The issues become so apparent and obvious that I think it's hard to imagine not feeling that way. And I definitely had to reckon with that a little bit this summer. But one of the things that was like one of those like little victories that you have to hold on to really tight, because you don't get that many. There was a campaign called the Shutdown STEM, #Shutdown STEM, #Shutdown Academia. And there were a lot of facets to it and demands. But I think the way I explain it to people fundamentally is it was to call attention to the fact that business as usual will not suffice. It won't suffice toward bringing about a better world. And I think many people who do science at their core want to be doing good and believe that they are. And so I think for me, what stood out as like one of those little victories is part of the Shutdown STEM was doing a strike. I decided to strike from my position, which wasn't a huge loss for the project. I wasn't able to disrupt necessarily work being done aside from, sending an email and basically being like, I'm doing this. And my boss at first reacted not great. Somebody who considered themselves like very in it and was kind of like, in this administration, I couldn't imagine shutting things down. We have to keep science going at all costs. But then later he reached out to me and basically expressed, because, you know, we had some back and forth after that. I explained my reasoning. And I could see even beyond that a shift, not just in his own ideas about, you know, say the movement for Black Lives this summer, or for us in ecological spaces, Indigenous rights is huge and something to be reckoned with consistently. So I didn't only see his kind of opinion shift on it, but he started to dedicate time and space to those discussions, and then he's changing some of the ways he's doing things. So like, yeah, that was a concrete time of bringing someone in. And I think what it took was definitely the willingness to disrupt things, but I don't think it would have been as successful if there wasn't people behind me who are willing to stand up. And there were other research assistants who were also striking. So it's kind of like that willingness to do as much as you can as an individual, but to rely on, you know, collective action even more so, and to build those relationships that allow you to have that larger impact too. Yeah.
Oh, I think we're losing you momentarily, Tori, or maybe you're losing me. Can everybody still hear each other? No.
I can hear you,
no.
but it might be my internet.
Oh, it's me. I'm so sorry. It's me here in quarantine. Oh, I'm back.
I hear you.
Sorry, that was such a beautiful point, Tori. I'm really sorry I disrupted it with my terrible internet connection. For the viewing public, you're having a weird window into the world's hardest corona quarantine. I think it might actually, I mean, maybe there are parts of China right now that are just in as serious lockdown as I'm in right now, but like the army is outside. I don't have control over my internet connection. Everything is weird. So sorry if this is going weird. Yeah, Tori, that was an amazing point that I interrupted. And solidarity is key. Having people behind you and building relationships, and people really believing in those relationships being more important than the work must continue at all costs, or we must continue following this particular line of life-giving identity that I'm going to claw onto as my meaning for being here at all costs. Like we've seen, if any time has taught us what at all costs does without really looking around and paying attention to relationships, we're seeing how incredibly destructive that's been. Just lots of nodding.
Yeah, I could just say, just building up this point on relationships, I think that that's really true. And I think that a lot of time and energy and money in sort of the corporate media system goes into convincing us and developing our, like, creating ideas and subjectivities that suggest that people are just fundamentally bad, you know, and that there's just fundamentally sort of more bad people than good people, and that, you know, sort of human beings are pretty much a lost cause. I think, you know, everything from reality TV to, you know, just the political sphere, to the, you know, to advertising, to the news, just the entire, you know, $1 trillion corporate media system accumulates these ideas and is pumping them into our heads pretty much 24/7. And social media is a part of that too. And so I think it kind of puts a lot of thoughts and ideas into people's heads and a lot of conditioning. And then also what we end up doing is kind of blaming people for that conditioning too. I think that's something, it's a trap that folks fall into, like even / maybe especially people who really think of themselves as kind of like good and activists and sort of the people who are on the right side, I think often fall prey to this concept of just like, well, if other people just had these ideas instead of these ideas, then everything would be okay. And, there's something I think very flawed about that orientation, that sort of stays at this level of like mental events and doesn't really get to this material reality of understanding, who's hurting, who could be organized, and also that there's so much money and power behind making sure that we, don't develop consciousness, don't develop relationships, don't sort of speak beyond our own sort of bubble, and that's also a conscious process. It's not just an accident. So I think it's really especially important for folks who are activists and organizers to have self-awareness about those processes that are taking place that are affecting how we see each other.
What processes, this is another big question, but maybe you could speak a little bit about the things that you do to keep yourself safe from this negativity, to be able to, we have to put on our, it's a terrible phrase, I can't think of a better one, put on your own oxygen mask first if we're all going to be doing this together and building relationships. Like, how do we keep ourselves and other people safe from these anxieties and negativities about going out into a world where a lot of people disagree with us and we still have to find a way to move forward together?
I think, for me, I think one part of that is just base building. It's like going out and talking to people and bringing them into our organization. So we're making contact with folks who we don't know all the time, and just talking to them about the healthcare system, asking them, really listening more than talking, right? Asking about their experiences and what they've seen, what they've dealt with. And if we don't sort of fall into these, because I think a lot of times what people are doing when they're talking to each other is they're just actually playing scripts, right? Like it's MSNBC talking to Fox News, right? It's not like two human beings talking to each other. And so when we kind of get out of that, and it's like, I'm not approaching you because I think that you should be a Democrat instead of a Republican, right? Or whatever. It's like, no, I'm talking to you about something that's part of your experience and like our basic needs, coming back to that. It just opens up a lot of possibilities, and it really shows that, like, again, people's consciousnesses are influenced by a lot of things, but that doesn't mean that they're not in a process themselves, and that we can't be relating to each other in a way that like transforms us. So I think base building, and just really having lots of organizing conversations is something that's like an antidote to the media system.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, Brianna.
Oh yeah, huge like second on base building. Like I think that's one of the most like life-giving parts of organizing for me. I don't know how I feel about electoral politics at this point in life, but in my like organizing time, I like did a lot of, I guess, canvassing, kind of like door to door, like on the street or whatever, to talk about candidates, but also to like really talk about like the issue, just what are people dealing with in their life as related to like what do we want new people in office for. And I think just like, and that and so many other issues is just very like connecting, to be like, oh, we going through like the same thing, or like if this person telling me their experience is like so down with what we're saying, when it would be like if they just read this on Twitter or something, they'd be like, that they might not agree the same way. So I think that's huge. And like, I don't know if I think it is like, can be exhausting work. And I think a lot of organizing is maybe like not everybody's bag, but I think there are ways that all of us can do that in life. And I guess, I don't know, just as someone who is on the internet and on Twitter, I guess, I think we could all do well to just like remember that like organizing fundamentally is about like collaboration, and like if someone doesn't know something, not like, I guess, attacking them, but like teaching and like learning together, or like assuming that maybe they do have good intentions and they actually like aren't a terrible person, and we could get on the same page. And I think a lot of people maybe are seeing maybe organizing or activism as like yelling at people with bad opinions. And I just don't think that's like how we're gonna get places. And I think it can be really tempting as like, oh, somebody who like has already thought about how like every system that's running our society is bad. Like, it's so tempting to be like, if you don't get this, it's just like you're never gonna get it. But I truly don't think that's true. And I think it can be especially tempting as a young person to like throw out old people, but I just don't think that people like older than 30 can't and don't understand this stuff. So I think like truly remembering like organizing and like any type of like movement work or just like change making is about like treating people as people and like trying to recognize the good in people or like take them at their best so we can build something together, because we probably like have more in common than we think.
Oh my God. I mean, that's like urgent right there. Treating people as people and not always assuming the worst.
I like the point about not maybe throwing out old people. You know, I have to remind myself that sometime.
Old people, over 30, very old.
Okay, boomer. I think, yeah, when you asked about like what keeps you like safe, I kind of thought about like what keeps us safe and keeps us fighting. And what I've leaned so heavily on is balancing the generative work. So like the building, the creating, the imagining. Similar, I think it's coming back full circle to what Nijmie was saying in the beginning too, the imagining needs. I think really spending time to do that, because when you spend time in that space of thinking about what you want things to look like, you kind of you're better able to embody that. And I think for me, the best change that gets made or the most enduring can come from just people living as if, you know, famous Angela Davis quote, right? You know, you have to live as if those things are possible. And yeah, that has kept me the most safe, the most able to keep fighting, is being able to consistently, you know, step back and ground within those processes and invite other people to do the same. Because I think, yeah, activism is not all shouting at people for doing things wrong, although, you know, disruption is important and all those things are key. But yeah, what really keeps me going is thinking about what we could have. And I think there's so much we can have. Yeah.
That's an incredibly beautiful point to tie up this question. I think if is there anything anybody would like to say before we close out the formal part of the question answering? Is that nodding or no?
Yeah. I think I'll add one thing.
Yeah, do. Why not?
Well, yeah, when I looked at this question as a whole in terms of moving forward together and doing things that are important for change, I don't know. For me, there was an entire thinking about just myth breaking in general. And what I love about science, and what I think science is really good at, what its utility is to question what's there and to, you know, systematically try to figure out what may appear as one thing and what is really going on, and to make that a continual process that is never fully finished. And so I think how we move forward together is recognizing the the continuity that is needed and the continuousness. I don't know, making up words here.
Yeah, I think continuity is definitely a word.
That was a word. Just don't know if it's the one I'm looking for, but regardless, yeah, just that need for questioning and continuing to pursue more and incorporating more types of knowledge, what counts. All of that is really key. I think that's all I would want to leave us with to think on from my side.
That this urgency requested is intentionally provocative, because it's in times of crisis, everybody's looking for a quick fix so we can go back to normal. And I don't think that is a very productive approach. We are all on a big, long journey where we want to be able to have humans be humans together in a better place for humans and all of the other non-human things that will hopefully continue to exist if we make a few changes. Okay. Oh yeah, Brianna.
Oh, I was just in response, because I think that is really like what Tori was saying about how science is about like constantly discovering and knowing and like challenging. I think that's just something that we should also just constantly be bringing into like organizing or activism, or like, I think we can look back at so many movements and be like, y'all did like a lot in your time, and now if we could do that today, we would do it differently. Like, I think there's been so much about like the civil rights movement did so much like respectability that we just don't have to and don't need to. The feminist movement was not super like, I'm just not inclusive of a lot of different women, but like women of color, like Black women especially, trans women, like etc. Like we can do that differently. And I think it's just so important to be applying that to how we think about things. Like even like, I feel like 4 years ago, I would have just called myself a socialist. And then like over the summer, I was like, damn, a lot more people are like thinking and showing me new things about like anarchism that I never would have thought of before. So I think, yeah, just like applying that to our movement, because I don't think we'll ever all be right. And then, you know, the material conditions of the world are like always changing, and we should change with them and not just be like, okay, well, we thought 5 years ago was probably right for the rest of the time, right?
Mm-hmm. Amazing.